Hello Internet. Welcome to the second Chuck Chat. This one is going to be about a term that everyone's aware of, everyone hears probably every day, is definitely used in the news every day, both sides, because oddly it has kind of infiltrated or become a part of every single facet of our politics today. And so much that a lot of people argue that this particular term was the deciding factor of the most recent election, and if not the deciding factor, then certainly a huge impact on it. And still, I find that it is very poorly, or at least very vaguely defined by people on both sides of the aisle. Either people can't quite put their finger on what it means, or on the other side, often there's a lot of extra things packed onto this term that are maybe loosely related to it, but are not, like, they don't define it, and so that pushes people away from it. And that word is wokism, right? Being woke. And it's one of those words that currently causes a very strong emotional response. And it seems like there's probably always, rotating couple dozen terms, words, laws, names that if someone just says them, it will elicit a very strong response. If I said gun rights, opinions come to your mind automatically. If I said free speech, if I said abortion, or China, or Russia, or Trump, right? All these words kind of, without any context, cause us to formulate opinions really quickly to either defend or to attack. And there's not really a lot of in the middle here. And that's why, I think that for this one specifically, I'd like to just spend some time talking about it and boil it down. And same as what we do with fascism, just talk about woke, the term, in its original sense and its original definition. And I think at the end of that, people on both sides of the aisle can kind of agree that it's not what we say it is exactly, and B, is kind of just a useful tool for humans to have, and ultimately it comes down to empathy. Right? And so I think it was first kind of made the scene in, the popular vernacular in the 30s, right? I believe it could have been before that, but it became popular in the 30s, and then has kind of sprouted up every few decades or so, especially with the ongoing civil rights movement. And so, once tensions boil, this word comes back to light in the 60s at the height of the civil rights movement. It was big. It was in some songs and poems and like a play or two, and then politicians started to use it. They started to adapt this word woke. And that's most likely when it started to take on these extra meanings in one way or the other. And obviously, it's been a very prominent word for the past decade or more in the United States here, especially in our political cycles, in our news and everything like that. It's one of those strong reaction words. And originally it was meant to kind of, to be woke was to just have awareness. That's it. Just recognition. And originally it was just having awareness that the African American population in this country had different levels of justice and injustice going on through different times, and that's all it means. And there are further conversations that we had past that, but to just recognize that there were different laws and different expectations and different standards based on your race in this country, it makes you woke. It makes you like beginner woke, right? And so it'd be really hard because we have pictures and videos of whites only. We have two drinking fountains right next to each other. One's clearly crappier, and it says, coloreds only. And, back of the bus, like there are famous stories about this stuff that you cannot deny. And they didn't send people of color to the back of the bus because it was more comfortable or even because it was less comfortable. It was just a power trip. They were just telling them that they were more important. And so there's no reason for us to deny this stuff, right? I think the first thing they say in Alcoholics Anonymous is you have to admit you have a problem, right? And you can't do these other steps without that. And so, the road to tolerance is a multi-tiered sort of system. And the first thing that, it just helps us in every situation too. It's not just, with, transgender people or gay people or black people or Muslim people. It's when we deal with everyone, when we deal with someone at the grocery store, when we deal with someone that seems like they're having a hard day or had a hard time doing something, or someone that is angry, or someone's lashing out, or someone's whatever, just putting ourselves in their situation. That's literally all woke means, to recognize that humans have different experiences. Done. Now, let's see. Now, I think one of the reasons that so many people are against woke is because they think that it means you have to be DEI, that you have to support critical race theory, that you have to, be in a support of affirmative action or transgender rights or gay rights or like all these things. And that's one of the ways that we've sort of screwed this word up, is we're packing all these other things on top of it. And so, if someone doesn't want to be involved in DEI or CRT or anything like that, then they're going to reject wokeism as a whole. And when I think that it would be really helpful for us all to strip away all that stuff and to just look at this word woke, and to maybe even just recall it empathy. And then we can just kind of learn how to, what we've all heard a million times, walk in someone else's shoes. And we don't even have to walk a mile in their shoes, right? All we have to do is put their shoes on and recognize that different people have different shoes, right? Different, levels, sizes, different holes, and people have different shoes, and that's just the gateway to tolerance, and just seeing that there is a difference, and that's it. And one of the really interesting things, because obviously we're talking political, this wokeism splits the political aisle, right? Those who are woke are liberal, those who are anti-woke are conservative. Whereas woke actually doesn't mean liberal, just like it doesn't mean DI and CRT and affirmative action and all that stuff. It just means awareness of someone else's prediction, right? And so it doesn't help the liberal side to tack all this other stuff on it. We should just be focusing on, if we can get people to just recognize that, so many people on the Republican side, for instance, are talking trash about Californians. And it's like, I get that you might not like the politics or their economic policies or, their whatever, but their house burned down in a fire from nature. We can disagree with a whole bunch of stuff surrounding their ideologies, but realize that they're going through a human experience, and whether or not we go out and help them and give them our shirts or our clothes or our shoes, realize that they just had something happen to them, and they're going to have feelings and emotions, and they're going to have loss, and they're going to like they might have lost loved ones or dogs or pictures or their childhood home, or even just support system or safety or security, or just so many different things. And again, our reaction to that loss isn't written in stone. We don't have to react a certain way, but just realizing that their stuff just got burned up, it was just the start of it. And again, one of the interesting things is that it seems like most of the people that are against wokeism also identify with being Christian in this country. That's the prominent religion. And the fascinating thing I think about that is, without all that DI-CRT stuff, wokeism meaning empathy, if you look at Christ the man, and I don't want to push any non-Christians away. I myself am not a Christian, but as someone that tries to practice and also tries to preach and practice what they preach, right? Critical thinking and deep reading and logic and just all this stuff, I should be able to hear something, see something, feel something, and then derive something useful out of that. If I'm listening to a speech or a debate or watching a movie or a cartoon, a SpongeBob SquarePants episode, right? If I'm listening to a sermon or like reading an essay or whatever it is, even reading Mein Kampf, right? You can extrapolate something out of that, and it's certainly not, we should exterminate all these people, but we can, draw something out of it in terms of, what he was thinking, and I don't want to get stuck on that one, with same thing with Christ, right? We don't have to get caught up in the God of it all and the heaven of it all, but Jesus was way cool. Like, he had some really great ideas, and he was a very, very early civil rights activist, human rights activist, and he would sit and support and listen to and help out when he could and forgive when he had to, prostitutes and addicts and tax collectors and swindlers and liars and murderers and all these different people, politicians, but it didn't turn him into any of these things, right? And so his empathy, his ability to see people for being people, realize that they have gone through certain things and have reacted to those certain things and have become a certain way, but realizing that is just the human nature, and that's okay. He sometimes gives them advice or a way of salvation or whatever, but he's being empathetic. He's sitting, he's breaking bread, he's drinking wine, he's having conversations, he's showing love and compassion, right? And so empathy, wokeness, was really one of Jesus's favorite human superpowers, and the Bible is absolutely riddled with it. And again, I don't want to push away any non-Christians for the next part, because I just thought I would speak to Christians, and also those of other religions too. I could have done this with the Book of Mormon. I could have done it with Bhagavad Gita or the Quran or the Torah. Probably not the Book of Scientology. That one's a little wackadoo. All sci-fi stuff, but most religious tracts have empathy and sympathy and compassion and humanity built in them. And so when I read, it's just a couple that I found from a Bible that one of my friends gave me, but when I read these, take away, if you are a Christian, then this is your language, this is Jesus and the prophets speaking to you. And if you're not a Christian, listen to the words anyway. Listen to the message. You can take the heaven and the salvation and this and that out of it and just really listen to some really wise words. And if we would just kind of, instead of putting the politics on woke, put the humanity on woke, then I think that it would be a much more palatable and agreeable term that we can use. And so anyway, here's just a few Bible verses that I found that I thought spoke to wokeism. Ephesians 4:32, and be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another as God in Christ forgave you. Right? Be kind to one another, tender-hearted with another, forgiving one another. Right? Ephesians 5:2, and walk in love as Christ loved us. Right? And I think everyone, and this is hard stuff. It's not the easiest thing for us to do all the time. We need frustration, we need aggravation, we need bigotry and hatred, and it's often difficult to respond to that stuff with love. But walking in love, just makes your steps a lot lighter. let's see, Galatians chapter 6, verse 2, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. And again, if you're a Christian, this whole thing pertains to you. But if you're not, bear one another's burdens, like help out your friends and neighbors, help out your enemies. 1 Peter 3:8, finally all of you, love unity of spirit, sympathy, love of brethren, a tender heart, and a humble mind. And do not return evil for evil. Matthew 7:12, so whatever you wish that men would do to you, do so to them, for this is the law of the prophets, right? Do to others as you would want done to you. The most basic, simple stuff. And that is woke, that is empathy, that is sympathy, that is that is courage, that is love, that's humanity. Last one, Romans 12:15, rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep. Right? That's literally empathy defined. So they're saying, when you're at your nephew's birthday party, when he's, holding your breath with everyone and he blows out his candles and see that he just, made his wish, you're clapping and cheering with this kid who just blew out candles on a cake. That's empathy. You'll already practice it when you go to your friend's parents' funeral and they're having a hard time and you didn't know the parents or you didn't really care or this or that. You can still recognize that they're going through a hard time and give them a hug and give them your support. Show them your love. Show them you're there. That is empathy. That's all they're talking about. And I think that, the religious folks of the world who think that woke wants to change your views, I think that, it would help you to remember, what would Christ think? How would he react to this sort of stuff? Would he be like, I don't like them trying to blah, blah, blah. I'm going to make laws against them being able to, live lives the way that they want? No, he would absolutely not do that. He would show love and understanding, and if he had to, forgiveness. And that's totally okay. And he didn't agree with all of their lifestyles, but he never raised a hand against them. He didn't harm them. He didn't enact violence or protest against them, right? He didn't tell them that they weren't welcome, that he didn't consider them people, right? Now, on the other side, for those who claim to be woke or supporting woke, especially those, most woke end warriors, right? First of all, good for you for being conscientiously conscious of other people. And for the most part, those who are woke are always thinking of the underdog, those who are discriminated against, those who are oppressed, those who are going through these more difficult times. And I just want to remind you, like I have to remind myself all the time, that woke does not stop with, LGBTQ. It doesn't stop with, African nations going through whatever they're going through. It doesn't stop with the, war in Palestine. It doesn't stop with Ukrainians, being attacked with Russia. It doesn't stop with, racial disparity. It doesn't stop with Islamophobia, right? It also extends to maybe MAGA, maybe those conservative Republicans, maybe those very extreme Christians who have different experiences, who are influenced in different ways, who have different ideologies, and who have feelings, right? And so I don't want to just throw the conservatives or the Christians under the bus too, because people on the liberal side, I think that we just have to soften our hearts for those that we are fighting against, those other policies that they're inherently against, all those things that they vote against. Empathy is something that is, spoken about throughout the world, throughout history, and generally yields pretty good results. And again, not everyone is going to be able to find empathy, and we're going to have empathy for those who don't, right? And then we're going to have to, instead of us being hardened to that entire side of the aisle, sit and use as much empathy as we can on those who will hear, those who will be able to understand what we're saying. Because most of the people in this country are moderates. Most are Christians, and so most, when you just appeal to them and say, look, what would Jesus do, right? Where's our bracelets from '98? Because the way that both sides are communicating with each other on this topic, which comes down to individual rights, comes down to human rights. You know, telling transgender people that they're not citizens makes them feel bad, right? You know, like, imagine if the government said they don't recognize you because of whatever, right? That's just a lot to hear, especially from your government, especially in a country that's supposed to be all about liberty, right? You know, we can't forget that, you know, gay people have only been legally allowed to get married for like a dozen years, right? For the hundreds of years preceding that, half of the world and their entire government said you're not allowed to love who you want to love. Now, being woke does not mean you have to support gay marriage, that you have to, you know, line up, that you have to get divorced, that you have to change your sexuality or your identity or get new friends or anything like that. All it means is you recognize that being told you're not allowed to love who you want to love probably hurts your feelings. You know, that would probably hurt your feelings. And again, you don't have to jump on the other side. You don't have to wave any new flags. Just recognizing that people are going through difficult times is a beautiful start, right? It's a beautiful start to having more fulfilling and more useful conversations that will mend this country just a little bit, just one or two stitches at a time, okay? Because the way that we're all talking about everything is clearly pulling us apart. I think that people would have a very hard time denying, right? They would recognize and agree that this country is, you know, the fracturing politically, socially is, you know, increasing. We are pulling apart, which is dangerous for a country this size and with this history to do. And so the more we can do to bring us a little bit back together, and it's going to go back and forth and back and forth, so that's why every one of us has to do the best we can on a day-to-day basis to bring us together, you know, same side. You know, not only are we all American, which shouldn't even really matter that much, we're all human, right? We're all going through something hard and something good, something happy, something sad. You know, we should be able to recognize that. You know, weep with those who weep. You know, celebrate with those who celebrate. Okay, because we're kind of drifting apart, and that's a really dangerous thing to do, right? And I'm going to close with one more little Bible verse, and I think that both sides can hear this and apply it and say, you know what, that makes sense. You know, maybe we shouldn't be sprinting towards this end. It's Matthew chapter 12, verse 25. Knowing their thoughts, he said to them, every kingdom divided against itself is laid to waste, and no city or house divided against itself will stand. Okay, and again, whether you want to take it literally, whether you want to, you know, prescribe it to every single country in history and every single government, is, you know, you can do that, but just listen to the words, digest them, and realize that we are becoming a kingdom divided against itself, and very rarely do those last very long. Usually pretty rough little destruction. So you know, let's try and be woke and recognize and appreciate and have empathy and sympathy for all other people who are going through it, because everyone's going through it. And then once we have that recognition, that empathy, we can move on from there. You know, we don't have to, nothing's written in stone, we'll figure it out. Some things we will, some things we won't, but let's just start by softening our hearts a little tiny bit, especially towards those who we don't get along with. You know, I think that's a great place to start, and you know, Jesus would be proud. So, all right, that's all I got.